Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Shel Tikva, Shavua Shel Ahava, Shavua Shel Briut, Shavua Shel Chizuk. May it be a good week, a week of hope, of love, of strength, and of health. I miss being in the main sanctuary in the HaGadol of our Bayit with each and every one of you. And I share these words this Motzei Shabbat HaGadol, closing my eyes and picturing us all together in our Bayit, learning, growing, and striving. And I open my eyes again and send love from our personal Bayit to each and every one of your Batim, Kedoshim, your holy and wonderful homes that together make up the collective of our community, of our family, of our Bayit. I want to begin tonight with a tefillah, which will be shown as the first slide, the first source. For those who printed out the source sheets before Shabbat or after Shabbat, you have this as source number 1, and it's now going to be on our screen. And I invite you to sing with me. The first stanza here is from our tefillah, right after Tachanun, Shomer Yisrael. The second and third stanzas express in our words the things we so desperately seek God's protection, strength, and help for in these moments. Let's join each in our own homes together. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemo Sherit Yisrael, V'al Yovad Yisrael, HaOmerim Shema Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer, Rofi, Shemo Kochot HaOzrim, V'al Yipol Af Echad Me'alochamim, HaMekayemim הבטחתך, אני השם רופא חולים, שומר בני אדם, שמו כל באי עולם, ואל ייתן למשחית לנגפם, האומרים אל נא לפנה לכולם. תידדדי, דדדי, דדדי, תידדי, דדדי, da da da, ti da 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 da, ti da da na 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 na, ya na 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 na. I chose to begin with this song, this tefillah, because the heart of it, the notion of shmirah, shomer, lishmor, of protection, of guarding, of holding dear, is so central to our consciousness, our parlance, our actions, our thoughts, our feelings in these days. Everything's about protection. Masks, PPE, how we stand, where we go, if we leave the house, when we leave the house, how we leave the house. Are we protected? How can we feel safe? And the choice to follow the bumper sticker on so many Israeli cars, not for cars, but for human beings. Shmor merchak, the painful need for the sake of saving lives, to keep distance one from another, with its heavy toll. And we're doing that because we believe it's our imperative to protect our lives and the lives of those we know and those we don't know, the lives of those who have been and could be impacted in our families, in our bayit, in our neighborhood, our city of New York, our state, our nation, and our world. Ala mavet b'chalonenu. Death has risen to our windows. We've lost loved ones. I think about Isaac Ehrlich, the dear son of our 100-year-old Holocaust survivor, Sonia, so precious to us. And Sonia's words, I lost my best friend. Why him and not me? And we feel the weight of those who are ill around us. And we feel the weight of these days and these times. And in the same breath, I have to say to you, as exposed and vulnerable, as much as I feel unprotected, I also feel protected. Not in the sense that I know whether I or those around me will fall sick with coronavirus or not, but in a different sense, maybe a deeper sense. I feel held by our community, by each of you. I look out and I see the acts of daily protection and loving kindness that are done. And I feel in the same time, unprotected and protected. Shamur, nishmar, and seeking shmirah. And in the midst of this, we come to Chag HaPesach, this Motzei Shabbat HaGadol, with Pesach upon us in just a few days. From the beginning of coronavirus, Pesach became a place for us to put so many of our worries and anxieties. I received emails, phone calls, maybe we should cancel Pesach this year, maybe defer to Pesach Sheni. How can we in these moments celebrate a holiday which is so much about togetherness when we're apart? So much about redemption and freedom when we feel bound up, confined, and enslaved. So much about hope when we're struggling. This Shabbat HaGadol, I feel that very deeply. And yet in the same breath, I feel the power of everything that our community has done. And I offer our learning over the next time together as an encouragement to help us believe that while we wish we didn't have the coronavirus, and maybe in some ways we wish we didn't have Pesach coming in the heart of it, that there are many, many things to this year's Pesach which can strengthen us, give us hope, and allow us to feel most deeply one of our most basic mandates as Jews and as human beings, the mandate of Shmirah in all its meanings. As hard as it is to observe Pesach this year, is as important as it is to observe Pesach this year. Yes, differently than we've ever observed it before, but in the hope, with all its struggle and challenge, that new lessons, new opportunities, new possibilities will emerge about who we are and what it means to be not just those who seek God's protection, but to be ourselves shomrim. What are we shomer? When we seek protection, what is it that we're protecting? What matters most to us that we want to hold dear, preserve, and guard with all our might? And when we protect, what do we do to express that protection? That's what I want to learn and discuss with you in the deep belief that the Torah's message of what it means to be a shomer emerges most centrally from Leil Pesach, from the night we'll celebrate together and apart in just a few days. So what are we shomer? If I asked you when someone starts a sentence, I'm a shomer, or I'm shomer, what the next word is, I imagine you might fill it in with a few possibilities. Shomer Shabbos, shomer kashrut, shomer negia, shomer mitzvot. And I want to explore this concept of what it means to be a shomer something. Shomer kashrut and shomer negia emerged much, much, much later. The Torah never uses the language of shmirah to talk about them. But the other two, and two more, are at the core of the Torah's message of what it means lishmor. So what are we shomer? In the Torah, perhaps the first thing, and I think the thing we most often think of when we think about being shomer, is shomer Shabbos. The notion of shmirat Shabbat is so deep in the Torah, and here are two examples of where we see it most powerfully, perhaps its two most central mentions. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat. Let us preserve, keep, protect the Shabbat as an eternal covenant. And in the Aseret HaDibrot, in the Aseret HaDvarim, in the Ten Commandments, when repeated in Dvarim, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. So much of Shabbat is about protecting. And if you look at the first source, you see V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, la'asot et HaShabbat. There's two things here. In other words, whereas in source 2, all we do with Shabbat is shomeret, in source 1, we do asiyat Shabbat. And yet there's this second layer of shmirah over and above our observance of Shabbat, our doing of Shabbat. There's some sense of preservation, of guarding, of keeping Shabbat. And this is one of the most central things we are shomer in the Torah. But it's not the only. As we said, far beyond Shabbat in the next source, we find sprinkled throughout Shmot, Vayikra, and Devarim, the notion of Shmirat Mitzvot. Of the 150 or so times that the verb of Shmirah, of Lishmor, comes up in the Torah, most frequently, probably more than half, well over half, it has to do with the idea of the mitzvot in their entirety. Not just of Shabbat, which is of course a central and fundamental mitzvah, but our entire covenant with God isn't just observed, it isn't just done, it's shomered, it's preserved, it's guarded, it's protected, it's held dear. In psukim like these, ushmartem mitzvotai va'asitem otam, where we see the same dual language as with Shabbat. It's not just that we do the commandments, we have to preserve them, protect them. And in this double language, shamor tishmerun et mitzvot Hashem Elokeichem ve'edotav v'chukotav asher tzivach. And so in the Torah, Shabbat and the entirety of mitzvot, the whole covenant, warrant the action, whatever exactly it is, of Shmirah. There's a third, perhaps more surprising and less familiar recipient of our Shmirah. And as I told you, Shabbat and all of the mitzvot are mentioned over and over again as things lishmor in Shemot, Vayikra, and Devarim. But throughout the book of Bamidbar, and a little bit as we've already seen in Vayikra, there's another thing we have to guard and protect. Shmirat HaMishkan, Shmirat Mishmeret Hashem, a preserving of sacred space. If preserving Shabbat was about preserving and being shomer, sacred time, and Shmirat Mitzvot is about preserving our entire covenant with God, Shmirat HaMishkan is about holding dear and taking good care of the sacred space where we come to connect with God. It's expressed, for example, in these two psukim, when Bnei Yisrael encamped, V'shamru Bnei Yisrael et Mishmeret Hashem, V'lo Yisau, echoing the language of Shabbat, V'shamru Bnei Yisrael et HaShabbat. We observed God's mishmeret, God's protection, protective space, and held tight for the moment, not traveling. In fact, even in this week's parasha, there is a language, the end of Parashat Tzav, this past Shabbat, the language of staying put as a way of guarding and protecting. And the language here too, Shmartem et mishmeret hakodesh vet mishmeret hamizbeach, lo yeh od ketzef al bnei Yisrael. That in addition to guarding sacred time and guarding our whole covenant, we guard sacred space. And I think that's one of the things that's felt for me the hardest about this time, amongst many things. On the first of our medical professionals process groups that we had a week ago Thursday night, one of our precious Bayit doctors, after talking about the challenge of doubling the size of their hospital ward to accommodate more people, and of the challenges of colleagues falling ill, and the incredible, overwhelming onslaught of patients and needs and new protocols, he stopped and said, and you know what, guys? I just miss shul. I miss being with each and every one of you inside our Heichal, being able to be Shomer Mishmeret Hashem, to guard our Mikdash Ma'at, our sacred space together. And I miss that too. And in the same breath, I believe it's not confined to space. When we gather over Zoom, sharing our homes with one another, we who share this Bayit, we are in some small way continuing to be Shomrei Mishmeret HaKodesh, to preserve that sacred space from outside instead of from inside. So these are the three central shmirot in the Torah. Shabbat, our sacred time, the entirety of the covenant, and the Mishkan, our sacred space. But it's surprising, or maybe not surprising, that a term that never caught on to follow the word shomer was matzot. No one ever says, I'm shomer matzahs, or I'm shomer chodesh ha'aviv. But far more than shomer kashrut and shomer negi'ah, the Torah literally expresses our responsibility for shmirah when it comes to Pesach. We see this in source 5. In our most central parasha, a chapter and a half that deals with our relationship to Chag HaPesach, starting all the way back at Pesach Mitzrayim, at Pesach in Egypt. There, the shoresh of shomer comes up not just surprisingly frequently, but describing a whole host of different things which we are meant to guard. Here I've just excerpted. This is largely from Parashat HaChodesh, from Shabbat HaChodesh just a couple of weeks ago. And indeed, I agree with the chat. The notion of Shmura Matzah actually comes very much from this language. And here it is, looking at verse 17. Ushmartem et hamatzot. But then further, Ushmartem et hayom hazeh. The translation here, you can even see how it's different in each place. Celebrate, celebrate. Then Ushmartem et hadavar hazeh, talking about the rituals of Passover night. Obey these instructions. And then again, Ushmartem et ha'avodah hazot. Keep this service. And then we'll come back to verses 41 and 42, but all the way at the very end of this section in chapter 13, verse 10, V'shamarta tachuka hazot l'moadah. Keep this ordinance at its appointed time. Keep, obey, celebrate, take care of. There's so many meanings to this idea of Shmirah, and it takes on all these objects. Within the very heart of Pesach and the ritual of Pesach night, we see actually, I believe, the seeds for the 3 Shmirot that follow. Because we are shomer matzot, we guard a physical thing. And looking up above at verse 6, the Passover sacrifice, the Paschal lamb itself, when taken, was described as v'haya lachem lemishmeret, something guarded, something protected. So matzah and the Korban Pesach are the recipients of shmirah. This lays the groundwork for the idea of preserving space, preserving things that then later manifests in Shmirat HaMishkan and preserving our holy places with God. And then we have Ushmartem et hayom hazeh later in verse 17. Keep this day. This lays the groundwork, I believe, for the idea of Shmirat Shabbat, preserving and guarding sacred time for eternity. And then we have Ushmartem et hachuka hazot, et ha'avodah hazot, preserving all of our activities, our laws. This serves as the groundwork for the idea of preservation of the entirety of mitzvot. Here on Pesach night, the very first Pesach, God invites us to build a relationship with time, with space, and with commandments that are guided and controlled by the verb of Shmirah. And so we see Shmirah start to take different forms, different recipients, and in a way serve as the foundation for our whole relationship with mitzvot. We see this developed even further in the next source 6, where the idea of Ushmartem et hamatzot, preserving the matzah, that ritual object, comes to be, in a sense, the crucible, the foundation stone for what we see in the next source in the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, which teaches us about the entirety of mitzvot. Source 6. Ushmartem et hamatzot. Rabbi Yoshia omer, al tehi korei et hamatzot, ela et hamitzvot. This first item which we are to preserve actually sets the foundation for us of the relationship we are to have of all commandments. The way we guard and protect our matzah, making it shmura matzah, watching it, caring for it, attending to its every detail. This serves as the basis for the way we are to relate to all of mitzvot. Keder she'ein machmitzin et hamatzah, kach ein machmitzin et hamitzvah, ela im ba'al liyadcha aseh ota miyad. In the same way we never let our matzah rise or leaven or lay fallow without attention, so too when we turn to a mitzvah, we embrace it, jump on the opportunity, celebrate it, guard it, protect it, and engage with it right away. And so Pesach night establishes for us some fundamental sense that our relationship with God, with God's mitzvot, with God's space, with God's time, with our world, is mediated through the idea of Shmirah. But of course, it doesn't really begin with Pesach. It begins with the first mention of Shin Mem Resh, this Shoresh in the Torah, which is, of course, also in a sense the first mention of human beings and our place in the world. In the very, very beginning of the creation story, reflected in source 7, the very first things in a way we're charged to do as human beings. Vayikach Hashem Elokim et ha'adam vayanichehu began Eden la'ovda u'lishomra. And even though after not too much time we're banished from Gan Eden, this becomes our mandate in the world at large, to try to make it that Gan Eden, not just to till it and work in it, but to tend it, to guard it, to protect it. This is our mandate, not just as Jews in our relationship to mitzvot, but in a universal sense as human beings, as God's creatures, to protect the world. So what begins to germinate here, I think, is a thesis, an idea, that what we're called upon to do as Jews and as human beings is to be shomrim, guardians, protectors. How? What do we do it? And how do those lessons emerge from the very first Pesach night? It's to those ideas that I want now to turn together with you, reflecting on what we can learn from them for this most challenging and filled with potential Pesach night. Let's turn to source 8. Up until now, we've been talking about shmirah, about lishmor, ushmartem, as a verb. But what does the actual act of guarding look like? How do we do it? Shin Mem Resh appears as a noun in a whole bunch of places throughout the Torah. Mishmarot, mishmeret, mishmar, ashmoret, shomer, all kinds of things. But there's actually only one place in the Torah in which the shoresh Shin Mem Resh is turned into a gerund, an inging sort of noun, a guarding, what we would in modern Hebrew say shemirah. That word never appears in the Torah. It only appears in this form, shimurim, vigil, watching, protection. And it appears twice in this most extraordinary pasuk, in the heart of the chapter we looked at before. Right after Bnei Yisrael actually go free, as we see in verse 41, at the end of their 430 years, be'etzem hayom hazeh yatzu kol tzivot Adonai me'eretz Mitzrayim. Literally right after the verse that culminates the climax of the Torah up until this point of coming full circle, back towards the land of Canaan, back to the land of our fathers, back to fulfill the promise in Brit Bein HaBetarim, we get this summary sentence about everything that's taken place in this chapter. Leil shimurim hu l'Adonai. It was a night of vigil, of guarding, of protecting, of preserving for God. L'hotziah me'eretz Mitzrayim, to take them out of Egypt. Hu halayla hazeh l'Adonai. This night is for God. Shimurim l'chol b'nei Yisrael l'dorotam. A vigil, a protection, a guarding for all of the children of Israel throughout the ages. This is a depiction, and we can close our eyes and try to picture it, of what that night was. It was a night of protection. There was destruction and death all around outside the doors of the children of Israel. And literally, God was their PPE. God was their protective garment, resting upon their houses, not allowing destruction to enter. Through the ritual that they did, through the choices they proactively made to follow the guidelines and rules and laws that God laid down for them over those days, they were protected. It was a night of divine protection from God for the children of Israel throughout the ages. Rashi explains this a little bit further with this most basic meaning of shimurim. Mishuma uba min hamazikin. What does it mean that it was a night of shimurim? What is the meaning of lishmor in this context? It's, as we said, literally protection from destruction. It's the most basic meaning that we think of when we think of the word lishmor. What does it mean? It means to be protected. It means that no harm can come to us. That's what this night of shimurim was. It was a night of divine protection, of God not letting destruction come upon us. That's the first and most basic definition of lishmor, to protect from harm. In some sense, this year we don't have that same sense of divine protection. We don't know whether this Pesach night will be a night of being spared from harm or of experiencing harm. We don't know after 3 days of Pesach who will find out fell ill, who will find out recovered, who will find out was spared. And yet we know that this Pesach, more than any other, we enter in with the sense of engaging in acts of fundamental and basic shmirah, this Pesach more than any other, I think we'll feel a little taste of what the Israelites in Egypt felt, trying to do everything in their power to follow the guidelines, the rules, the restrictions, the laws that have been set down for us because we believe our lives depend on it. And may we, from this Pesach, in times of health, in times of ease, take on that responsibility always, the responsibility to protect life, to protect health, as though our lives depend on it every day and in every hour, without the great fear, without the great weight, but with the responsibility that first and foremost what it means to be a shomer is to keep the lives and welfare of ourselves and everyone around us paramount, to know that there are harms out there and that our job is to protect. Looking around our emptier Seder tables this year, we'll know that those empty chairs are filled with our responsibility and our success in doing everything in our power to be shomrim. And that mandate of Shmirah comes all the way back to Breshit as well, to just the second or third time that this root appears in this most basic, universal mandate of what it means to be a protector in source 10. Vayomer Hashem el Kain hevel achicha, vayomer lo yadati, hashomer achi anochi. God said to Cain, where is your brother Hevel? And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Rav Avi has taught us that there is no answer given to this question in its moment, in its pasuk. The entirety of the remainder of the Torah and Jewish tradition is the answer to this question. The resounding yes. We are our brother's keeper. We are our sister's keeper. The responsibility for life and health falls upon each and every one of us as shomrim. And of course, it starts with ourselves. First, we protect and care for ourselves, and then we care for and protect others. This is the reason that I've been so incredibly inspired and moved by the outcry, the uprising, literally, of volunteers at every turn to deliver food and to shop and to call and to check in, because there are so many people whose lives depend on it, on being able to stay in their homes and have others go out. And in the same breath, it's why we've pulled back and back and back, centralized and centralized and centralized, told our volunteers, go out only once a week or less if you can, buddy with someone else, do shopping for others when you're doing shopping for yourself, because the shomrim too need shmirah. We all have to be as cautious and careful as we can. This is the first meaning of what it means lishmor, to protect life, to protect health, as we feel so deeply this Pesach. The second meaning of shmirah comes from an extraordinary notion in Jewish tradition about the way the verb shin mem resh appears in legal contexts. For those who printed out your source sheets before Shabbat, you have two additional sources from the Gemara that delve into this idea. They're too long to fit on a slide, so I'm going to explain them briefly and then delve into the next source that you have in front of you. There's a principle expressed in the Gemara, and it actually appears in the context of the pasuk that we saw at the very end of our section from chapter 12 to 13, V'shamarta tachuka hazot lemoada miyamim yamima. You must preserve this statute in its time, going forward day after day for eternity. There's two possibilities about what this law is. One possibility is that it's the Korban Pesach. And when Rabbi Akiva's opinion suggesting this is raised in the Gemara says, how could it be that the Korban Pesach, which is a positive commandment, is instructed using the verb lishmor? Because we have a principle, says the Gemara, that kol hishamer pen ve'al mitzvat lo ta'asehi. Whenever the Torah tells us shmor, hishamer, be careful, guard, it's actually telling us a negative commandment, something we're not supposed to do. The same question comes up for those who interpret this pasuk, v'shamarta tachuka zot, as referring to tefillin. There, Rabbi Yochanan says that somebody who puts on tefillin in the nighttime violates a negative commandment, because it says v'shamarta tachuka hazot, referring to tefillin, which is in that context in the psukim. You should guard this, meaning observe this in the daytime. And so if you wear tefillin at night, you violated this commandment. And Rabbi Yochanan says, though, that you violated a negative commandment. And the Gemara is puzzled. It's expressed in the positive. And so the Gemara debates this question. Some of people say, kol hishamer pen v'lav mitzvat lo ta'asehi b'heksher shelo ta'aseh, u'mitzvat asehi behekshel shel aseh. This idea of guard or protect adds on an additional negative commandment when the commandment itself is negative. But when the commandment is positive, it adds this extra layer of guard or observe or keep or protect. Others say no. Every time the word shomer, the mandate lishmor, appears in the Torah, it literally means there's an additional negative commandment added here. And therefore, along with the idea of wearing tefillin in the daytime, is a companion negative commandment not to wear it in the nighttime. And along with the commandment to observe the Passover sacrifice every year is a negative commandment, thou shalt not leave it out. This is finally expressed in source 11 in the Rashi in a different context, where after quoting a whole host of mitzvot in Parashat Mishpatim, the pasuk says, "Uvechol asher amarti alechem tishameru." Everything I have told you, you have to take heed, you have to observe it, you have to keep it. And Rashi, quoting the Gemara, says, "Lasot kol mitzvat aseh ba'azhara," to make every positive commandment also a negative one. Shekol shmira shebatorah azhara hi b'makom lav. Every time the Torah uses the language of shamor, it adds a negative commandment. This is a kind of a mind-blowing idea. And the first few times I thought about it, it didn't rest well with me. The idea that every time the Torah tells us to observe something in a positive sense, and it adds on the idea of shomer, it just means to strengthen, that's one thing. But the idea that every mitzvah has a negative association with it, that the things we're not supposed to do, we're really not supposed to do, and the things we're supposed to do, we're also not supposed to not do, adds a certain weightiness to Torah and mitzvot. It tells us that it's filled with limitations, with constraints, with negativity. And that's a hard message to understand or receive. And yet, in the very same breath, I think it is one of the most powerful ideas of our tradition. That along with being a progressive, open, deeply powerful tradition mandating us to take actions, part and parcel of what it means to be a Jew, to be embraced by and embracing of our covenant of mitzvot, is to recognize that it places restraints on us. It tells us there are things we can't do. Everything we do also has a sort of a don't side to it, a sort of a pulling back, a sort of a separation, a sort of a limitation. Indeed, this goes all the way back to Pesach night, the very first Pesach night, when God was saying to the children of Israel, part of what it means to be a Jew, to be a part of this covenant, is that there'll be times when you have to stay in the house. There'll be times when connecting to mitzvot means you can't do all the things you want to do. It means that implicit in our covenantal system is an idea of shamranut, of conservatism, along with the progressive, open, forward-thinking ideas of Torah, is a certain sense of limitation, of constraint. It's the message to the Israelites on that night that what it means to go free is not to be an Egyptian, but to be an Israelite. What it means to go free is also to be a servant of God, to feel a deep sense of commandedness, and to take into ourselves a sense of being limited by something which is beyond ourselves. This Pesach, I think we feel that in a religious sense, in a sense that the demands that Pesach make on us this year cause us to feel limitation, to feel sometimes isolation from those we want to be with, to feel this year we can't have the Pesach we want to have. We won't make all the foods we want to make. We won't shop for all the things we want to shop for. We won't get to be with the loved ones that we want to be with because not just of coronavirus, but the intersection of it with the universe of mitzvot. And of course, the universe of mitzvot in its wisdom and in its first meaning of shmirah, of protecting life, also means that there are ways and room within the system of halakha which is focused around ensuring our welfare and our safety and our psychological and emotional health over these days. And as we've said often, reach out to any of us so we can discuss what are the right things we can do to make this Pesach safe and healthy for each of us. But even with its safety and even with its health, it may be sadder. It may be harder to observe this year. It may feel emptier. We may feel a sense of those limitations and constraints. They're real. For those who will be in their own homes by themselves, we feel your pain acutely. For those who will be with their family but not their extended family, we feel our pain acutely. And in the same breath, I invite us this Pesach as we feel the sense that what Shmirah means is to accept constraints and restraints, to also find the beauty in them that Bnei Yisrael found on that night. That those restraints also provided some kind of freedom, some kind of newness, some kind of sense of being in relationship with that commanding force which is beyond us. And as we sit around our quieter Seder tables, may we feel a connection to tradition. May we discover a new Haggadah insight. May we have a conversation with someone, if they're there with us, or in our hearts, if it's just us, about what it means to us to embrace the system of Torah and mitzvot, even when it places challenges upon us. Even when it means that we're all eating the same silver leaf wonderful food that's different from the food we would have put on our tables in a different year. May we feel the power of the constraints, of the limitations, of the hishamer, of the system of mitzvot, this Pesach, uniquely, maybe differently than we ever have before, and in a way than I pray we ever will again. This limitation sense of constraint as part of it, what it means to be shomer mitzvot too, finds its place in Breshit, in the next source. After Adam in Gan Eden fulfilled the mandate and then didn't fulfill the mandate in a sense of lishmor, that which we were supposed to do in Gan Eden, we were taken out of the garden. This source should be Vayigaresh et ha'adam, Breshit Gimel Chaf Daled. There, we just went past. Great. Vayigaresh et ha'adam, vayashkein mikedem legan eden et hakruvim vedlat hacherev hamitapechet lishmor et derech eitz hachayim. God drove the human out of the Garden of Eden and stationed as a guardianship around Gan Eden these things which protected derech eitz hachayim. This sense of Shmirah is actually God's Shmirah, God's protecting this precious thing inside the garden. But what I think it resonates for us is the understanding that sometimes protection means limitation or restraint. What's happening here is after we go out of the Garden of Eden, God keeps the tree of eternal life from us. God says sometimes the thing you most desperately want is constrained from you, is kept from you. This is the sense of Shmirah, of limitation, of not having all the things we long for. We long for life, we long for health, and yet we know there will be times in which it eludes us. And our mandate as Shomrim is to imbibe and understand those realities of whatever our constraints and restraints are, and grow to transcend them to the best of our human capabilities. Thus far, we've suggested that there are two notions of Shmirah that come out of the very first Pesach, that come back from Bereshit in our most fundamental definitions as human beings. The responsibility to protect life, and the notion that as human beings and as Jews, sometimes the things we most desperately want elude us. And understanding that, and then putting in place tools, possibilities, and digging into our deepest reserves to transcend them, is so much of what it means to be in this world Shomrim, even embracing the limitations and the restraints. But there's a third sense of Shmirah, which I most especially want to bring to you tonight. It's a different interpretation of Leil Shimurim Hu Ladonai, going back to that pasuk from Genesis 12:42 that we read, and it's the interpretation of the Rashbam. The Rashbam is troubled by something that Rashi can't really answer, his grandfather. Rashi's definition of Shimurim as a night of protection from destruction made sense for the second appearance of Shimurim in the pasuk, a night of Shimurim l'chol b'nei Yisrael, of protection for the children of Israel, protection of them from harm. But the pasuk says it's Leil Shimurim Hu LaHashem. God doesn't need protection from harm. So the Rashbam looks for a different possible meaning of Shimurim and offers the following. Miyamot avihem haya HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzapeh lezeh halayla lahotzi et bnei Yisrael mimitzrayim kemo shehiv ticham. There are two appearances of Shimurim. Shimurim for God and Shimurim for bnei Yisrael. Says the Rashbam, the first one is that this was a night not of protection from harm, but of guarding, holding close, preserving. God was preserving this night from all the way back in the time of Brit Bein HaBetarim, of God's promise and covenant with Abraham, when God said, as we read in the HaGadol, jumping ahead to the next source for a moment. And here, of course, I want to notice that I believe the only place the Shoresh Shin Mem Resh, and I could have missed one, but I believe the only place the Shoresh Shin Mem Resh appears in the Haggadah is here. Baruch Shomer Havtachato Yisrael. Blessed is God who not observes, not protects, but protects in the sense of keeps, holds close, and plays forward God's promise to the Jewish people. Blessed is God. Because God was the one who thought about the end time all the way back at the beginning. When in Brit Bein HaBetarim, God said to Avram, know that your children will be strangers in a land not theirs. They will enslave them and make them suffer for these 400 years. And then I'll judge that nation. V'acharechen yitz'u b'rechush gadol. V'hi she'amda la'avoteinu v'lanu. It's that shmirat ha'havtacha. It's that protective promise which God made to Avram and kept all those generations and centuries later, which still God holds for us in every generation. This is what the Rashbam is talking about, going back to that source. Leil Shimurim hu Lashem. This is a night that God has been holding on to God's promise, preserving it and anticipating its fulfillment from the days of Avraham. And now God, who's been longing for this moment, hoping for this moment, has the joy of being able to see it come true. And if it's true for God of Shimurim, it's also true for Bnei Yisrael, the second appearance in the Pasuk. Uli Yisrael hu leil Shimurim ledorotam. For God, this Shimurim, this hoping and longing, found its fulfillment in the moment of Pesach Mitzrayim. And then in a sense, God handed the responsibility of Shmirah over to us and said, now it's yours to keep. How? Shemitzapim lazeh halayla lachug bo chag haPesach u'mishpatav. That we long for, that we hope for, that we yearn to observe the mitzvah of Pesach every year. Therefore, says the Rashbam, Shimurim lashon hamtana. It's a language of waiting, of holding on to it, anticipating the opportunity to fulfill it every year. For us, this may be what Pesach feels like this year. It may be a Pesach that we're keeping this year, not because we're so excited about this year's Pesach, but hamtana, holding on, knowing that if we didn't keep this year's Pesach, next year's Pesach wouldn't feel the same. And we're keeping it this year because we long for it next year, and the next year, and the next year. The notion that part of what it means to be a shomer mitzvot, a shomer Pesach, is not just to protect, not just to accept limitations and constraints, but to hope and believe in the opportunities of the future, in what lies ahead. This too takes us back to Breshit, in the very proof text for the meaning of Shamar that the Rashbam offers us. V'aviv shamar et hadavar. This is in a striking moment towards the end of Breshit, when Yosef tells his father his dreams that include, it seems, Yaakov, his father, coming to bow down to him. Yaakov hears these dreams, Vayigar bo aviv. He berates Yosef. Really? You dream that me and your mother and your brothers will come bow down to you? What does it mean? He's bewildered, confounded. And the response of the brothers, Vaikan uvo echav, his brothers express jealousy. And I think the Rashbam wants us to interpret here, Yaakov pauses for a moment. Va'aviv shamar et hadavar. He holds on to the matter. He doesn't act on it immediately. And in some conflicted, complicated way, with all our critiques of the relationships that sometimes the Avot had with their children, that sometimes Yaakov had with Yosef and his other children, maybe he held it as a piece of hope. Maybe he held it as a belief that the son he so loved would become a great ruler, and a ruler who maybe even further down the line would be able to reconcile with and hold on to and take care of his brothers and the rest of the Jewish people. This is a shmirah of hope, of belief that even if things look hard and messy and conflictual and painful now, lishmor et hadavar. And as Rav Ezra so beautifully shared with me, this Shamar et Hadavar, the Aviv Shamar et Hadavar, echoes alliteratively to Shamor et Chodesh Ha'aviv, Va'aviv Shamar et Hadavar, and to Ushmartem et Hadavar Hazeh. The notion of Aviv Shamar et Hadavar links up with two central messages of Pesach. Shamor et Chodesh Ha'aviv, not Aviv his father, but Aviv springtime. Hold on to the season of spring. Preserve the possibility of hope. And Ushmartem et Hadavar Hazeh. Hold on to this thing from Exodus chapter 12, the Pesach, its possibilities, its belief in freedom, in a better day that Bnei Yisrael put all their faith in on that first Pesach night, and that we're called upon to do this year too. To say, as hard as this Pesach will be, we hold on to it with hope. We hold on to it with the belief that a better Pesach will dawn, and that even the second day of Pesach, God willing, will be better than the first. And even that the second days of Pesach, God willing, will be better than the first. That part of what it means to be Shomrim is to believe in the future, in a better future. This idea of Shmirat Halayla, that the birth of the notion of Shmirah in its most fundamental sense for us as Jews, as part of the covenant of the Jewish people, finds its origins in the nighttime, in the darkness, comes to play out so many places around the rest of Tanakh, where the notion of Shomer and Shmirah is associated with night going into day. It's the notion in Tehillim, Kuf Chaf Aleph, in Psalm 21, Nafshi l'Adonai mishomrim laboker, shomrim laboker. My soul longs for God, like those watchmen in the night long for the day. They long for the day. And all the notions of the Shomer, the guardian, who goes up onto the watchtower, even in the thickness of midnight dark, and looks out, awaiting the break of dawn. Emunatcha baleilot, the sense that in the bleak darkness of night, we believe, vayi erev, vayi voker, as sure as there is night, there will be morning. It's Saturday night. It's Motzei Shabbat HaGadol. We began with Havdalah, and I want to end with a piyut that in our home we sing after Havdalah. Its first two stanzas, I believe, offer us the message of this particular Pesach, the message of Shmirah, Shmirat Halayla ad haboker, of preserving the night into the coming day. Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'chol, this beautiful piyut, which is believed perhaps to have been written not only for Saturday night, but actually for Motzei Yom HaKippurim, as it speaks about forgiveness and hope of the dawn of a new year, of new possibility. Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'chol chatotenu yimchol, zarenu v'chaspenu, and as we alternatively and also say in our house, zarenu u'shlomenu, yarbe kachol, v'chakochavim balayla. Asking the Shomer Havtachato, asking God who keeps God's promises, who makes a distinction between holy and profane, to forgive our sins, to complete and fulfill the promise that our children, yes, that our money in this financially trying time, and that our peace and welfare multiply like the sand of the sea and like the stars of the night. Yom Pana Kitzel Tomer. Day has passed like the shadow of a palm tree. We feel ourselves, we find ourselves these weeks in a sense of darkness, of night, so often closed up in our houses, looking out only the window for a sense of light. Ekra la'el alai gomer. And so I call out to God, this Motzei Shabbat HaGadol, this Pesach, finish for me this prophecy. The prophecy of this pasuk from Yeshayahu. Amar Shomer ata voker v'gam laila. Says the watchman, morning comes and also night. What's the comfort of this prophecy? Let's turn to see the pasuk for a moment, and then we'll come back to this piyut. Yeshayahu 21 tells about moments of impending doom and fear. And the people cry out to God, the watchman with a capital W, Shomer mami laila, Shomer mami lel. Watchman, how long will this night last? Watchman, what will be of this night? Amar Shomer, the watchman answered, Ata voker. I can see it off in the distance. The day is coming. V'gam laila, and also the night. Im tivayun ba'yu, if you wish to seek, seek. Interpreted also by Chazal in the language of tefillah. If you wish to pray, pray. Come back again and return. What's the comfort in this prophecy? For me, it would have felt better to conclude, Amar Shomer ata boker velo laila. Let the watchman say the day is coming and not night. Some commentaries suggest that this means day is coming for the Jews and night for our oppressors, but it's not the pshat. The pshat says to us, I believe, and certainly in the piyut, turning back there, Yom panak etzel tomer, the day has passed like the shadow of a plum tree, and what I ask God to complete for me is the message of Shmirah, of what it means to learn to be a shomer. What it means to learn to be a shomer is to protect life and health first and foremost, to know that there are rules and guidelines and best practices that if we follow them in dangerous times and in good, we will preserve life. We will do everything and have the most success that we can to ensure safety and health and welfare. Shomrim achenu v'achiotenu anachnu, that we are the guardians of our brothers and sisters, that we take care of ourselves, and then with every fiber of our being, we stand up and stretch out and reach out, as our bayit has done incredibly and will continue to do, to volunteer, to help, to call, to think, to serve, as our many doctors and healthcare professionals and chaplains to whom my heart turns with the most love and gratitude and care and concern, our shomrim, each and every one of us. Amar shomer, the watchman says, if we are watchmen protecting life and preserving life, as the Israelites did on that precious night in Egypt, as God asks us to do. Amar shomer, the shomer says, if we embrace and accept that life hands us limitations, the derech eitz hachayim sometimes is guarded from us. We have not immortality nor guaranteed health. That the system of Torah and mitzvot sometimes places limitations on us, on the capacity to have exactly the Pesach that we might have wanted or dreamed of, in the capacity to experience everything that we wish for. And yet embedded in that is tremendous possibility to transcend, grow, and deepen ourselves and our resilience from our limitations. If Amar Shomer, if we take in the message of the watchman, which is that hope springs eternal, Chodesh Haviv, that there will always be a future ahead of possibility and of day, then when the watchman says, Ata voker v'gam laila, that the way of the world is that day comes and then also night. And when we look at the news and accept for ourselves that there will be harder times before easier ones, and after those easier ones, again harder ones. But if we understand what it means to be shomrim, we'll be ready for those days. The message of Amar Shomer Ata Boker is false comfort. That's not our world. But the message of Amar Shomer, be a shomer, then you'll be ready for Ata Voker, v'gam laila, for the day which will come and the nights which will follow. There's no place I'd rather be in darkness and in light with our bayit, the people who inspire me every single day to try to serve, to try to grow, to try to protect health and life as best as I can, to try to work as deeply and powerfully within our system of halakha, within the constraints that we have as human beings, to make the most livable, most powerful, most beautiful lives for each of us, to develop resiliency and strength. And my teachers of hope, infinite possibility, of the bright lights that shine through even in darkness. Around our Seder table, we will see each and every one of you, your images, your faces, your voices, and know you are with us as we ask you to know that we Shira and I and our family, your precious rabbinic team, Rav Ezra, Rabbanit Bracha, Rav Avi, Rabbi Sarah, that we are with you. Every volunteer whom you saw or didn't see, heard or didn't hear, who made this Pesach possible for each of us is with you. Our Beit family is together, even when we're apart. Let's sing these two stanzas together and then end with the melody of daytime. Shomrim hafked li'ircha kol hayom v'chol halayla. The guardians which each of us can be for our city, New York City, Zion, in day and in night, with wishes for a Pesach of health, of strength, of love, of hope, and of peace. Hamavdil bein kodesh lechol, chatoteinu yimchol, zareinu v'chaspeinu, yarbe yarbe kachol, v'chakochavim balayla. Yom pana ketzel tomer, ekra la'el alai gomer, amar shomer ata boker vegam laila. Yom pana ketzel tomer, ekra la'el alai gomer, amar shomer ata boker vegam laila. Tiri lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Lai 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 lai. May God be our guardian, and may we be guardians for each other. Shomrim hafked leircha kol hayom v'chol halayla. 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 Knowing the full risks of massive unmuting and cacophony, let's sing one more time together.
think about it's just realistic.
Shavuatov, hi, lai, 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 hi, lai, 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 hi, lai, 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 Shavuatov. Love to all. Please kuvi imtzu. May we be strong together. Shavuatov, Shavuatov, Shavuatov.